The headlights cut across the Oregon desert like a blade, flooding the small clearing where 2 Yale students had pitched their tent after a long day of cycling. Terri Jentz woke to the sudden wash of light and the growl of an engine pressing closer. She pushed herself up, confused, her mind trying to pull meaning from noise that didn't belong in a quiet campground. The tent glowed white. A shadow moved across it. Before she could form a word, the truck surged forward and drove straight over them. Canvas collapsed around her as metal crushed the tent poles and forced her into the ground. Terri felt her ribs compress, heard the air tear from her lungs, and felt her bones take the weight of a vehicle that should never have been there. The truck backed up, tires grinding across the debris, and for a second she lay stunned under the wreckage, hearing only her own pulse. She thought the attack had ended, but then footsteps approached. The man tore at the tent fabric. Terri saw his shape above her, blurred by shock. He held an axe. There was no argument, no demand, no motive spoken, nothing but the sudden downward swing as he brought the blade toward her. Terri tried to shield herself, but the first blow came fast, slicing deep into her body. Pain radiated so violently that her vision pulsed black around the edges. She forced herself to stay conscious. She knew that if she slipped under, she would never come back. Beside her, her friend Shayna, also severely wounded, began to scream for help. The attacker turned toward the noise, swinging the axe again. Terri heard the blade hit, heard Shayna cry out, and realized the man was trying to finish them both. Terri could barely lift her head, but she understood one thing. Her only chance of living was to convince him she already had nothing left to kill. She went completely still, the way animals do when predators lose interest. Her breath came shallow and slow. She focused on silence. The man backed away and walked toward his truck. The engine started. Tires kicked dirt behind him. Terri listened as the sound faded until there was nothing but wind moving across the sagebrush. She lay bleeding on the ground, unable to stand, unable to crawl, the heat draining away from her skin. Her limbs barely responded. She turned her head enough to see Shayna's outline beside her and knew they would both die if help didn't arrive soon. They had chosen that remote park because it was supposed to be peaceful. The nearest highway sat beyond a series of dark trails, and cars rarely passed at night. Terri forced air into her lungs, each breath sharp and wet. She began to call out, her voice strained, more broken exhale than speech. Shayna tried too. Their shouts weren't strong, but they carried just far enough. A group of boys had been camping nearby. They heard faint cries, grabbed flashlights, and followed the sound through the brush. What they found would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Terri lay covered in blood, her body ripped open by the axe wounds. Shayna was barely conscious. The boys sprinted back to their campsite, threw equipment aside, and raced toward a nearby road in a pickup truck. One stayed behind to keep speaking to the girls, telling them to hold on. Terri listened to his voice and anchored herself to it, using those words like a rope. When help finally arrived, responders moved fast. They stabilized both women and rushed them toward medical care. Terri drifted in and out of awareness, hearing fragments of instructions, feeling hands press against wounds to slow the bleeding. She knew the damage was catastrophic. Her arms and legs felt split open from the inside. She didn't know if she would lose her limbs. She didn't know if her organs were intact. She only knew she wasn't dead yet. Doctors later said it was a miracle she survived the first hour. The axe had destroyed muscle and bone. Her pulmonary function was dangerously compromised. Infection was a major threat. But she endured surgery after surgery, each one intended to rebuild what had been taken apart by a stranger whose face she never clearly saw. In the days that followed, her hospital room filled with doctors, detectives, and family trying to understand what had happened at that isolated tent site and why. The investigation was difficult from the start. Terri did not have a clean description of the attacker. The strike of the axe and the collapse of the tent had blurred everything. The scene offered only tire tracks and a sense of direction. Shayna remembered the man's boots, but nothing more. The assault had been so sudden, so brutal, that the details had vanished in the chaos of survival. Still, the case stayed open, and deputies followed what few leads existed. Terri's physical recovery was slow and excruciating. She learned to walk again, step by step. She learned to use her hands again. The scars ran deep, carved across her legs and torso. Even when her skin healed enough to hide beneath clothing, she carried the memory of every injury. Her body became a map of that night, a reminder of how close she had come to disappearing in a patch of desert while the man who attacked her drove away without hesitation. Years passed. Terri returned to school. She built a life beyond the assault, but she never let go of the unanswered questions. She wanted to know who had hunted them, who had driven into their camp, who had lifted an axe over sleeping strangers as if their lives had no weight. Her search eventually brought her back to Oregon, to the area where it happened. She spoke with residents, local law enforcement, and anyone who remembered anything unusual from that time. She sifted through old case files. She met people who had long suspected a particular man from the region, a man known for violence, a man whose personality matched the rage she encountered that night. Though the suspect was never tried or convicted in court, Terri became convinced she had found the man responsible. Her work became part of her healing. She wrote about the crime, naming the brutality for what it was, refusing to let it stay buried in old police paperwork. She confronted the way the attack had changed her, the way trauma reshaped memory, the way survival carried its own weight. Her voice became an act of defiance against the man who tried to silence her. Terri lived. Not just medically, not just physically. She lived in the sense that she refused to disappear into the fear the attacker tried to carve into her. The scars remained, but they did not define the rest of her life. She took what happened and forced it into the open, giving her own story the ending he tried to deny her. When she looked back at the attack years later, she said she remembered the light first, the sudden glare of headlights slicing through the dark. She remembered the axe. She remembered choosing to play dead. And she remembered the moment someone yelled that help was on the way. Those details never faded. She saw the attack for what it was, a random act of cruelty that could have ended her life within minutes. But she also saw the survival that followed, bloody, painful, grueling, and real. She had been left for dead in the desert, but she did not die. The stranger came to kill. Terri held on long enough to tell the world exactly what he did. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.